everyone, at 1995 here in the video game fanfiction plot with a new story for you all. It is called Grey, and I do hope you enjoy this video, and remember, I do not own Transformers Prime series and Fullmetal Alchemist series or the story. I give full credit to its author MessyArtwok on DeviantArt. Now onto the story. Chapter 3: Endless. The pain seemed like it lasted forever. Words or rather, lack thereof was the only comfort Ed found laying there on the cold dark surface, staring up. Far up, revealed by a crack in the chasm, the night sky glistening intensely with starlight. Finally managing to gather what little strength he had, Ed rolled to his side and coughed Alphonse's name. Hey Al where are you? It's dark and I can't see a damn thing. I'm here, brother. Moving out into what little moonlight was available to them, Alphonse kneeled to meet Ed's almost lifeless mass. Where are we, Ed? I don't recognize this place at all. With Al's help to sit up, Ed looked around through the darkness, carefully examining the rock formations that lay in cold silence around them. Beats me like I said before it's too damn dark to see, even with the moonlight. I think we're still in the chasm under Laboratory 5, brother. Turning to look at Alphonse, Ed couldn't help but restrain from asking the obvious and followed Alphonse's gaze. Standing silent as though nothing had happened, stood the stone ring. Erect, holding no indication of ever having been active at all. Looking around at the chasm, letting his gaze adjust to the darkness. Edward could help but feel puzzled. This chasm looked nothing like the one they were previously in. There was no elevator, no scaffolding, no workers. No indication of human activity at all. How could this be the very same chasm? Could the ring's activation cause an explosion? No. Ed grimaced at the very notion. No, an explosion generated by a device this size would surely have generated a colossal crater that would have blown half of Central out of a mistress, and this cavern looked completely intact. Coming to the conclusion that their predicament and current location was not what it was previously. And to assume that they were still under Laboratory 5 was at the moment illogical. But then if they weren't under Laboratory 5 then where were they? Ed, is it just me or is there a very dim blue glow? Looking at Hal with an almost stupid expression on his face, Ed choked. Wow. Pointing, Al motioned with his head. Over there. Brother, look. And sure enough, when Ed's gaze followed Al's arm towards the direction he was pointing, his eyes glossed over with the reflection of a dim blue light emanating softly from a crack in the cavern wall. Standing, Alphonse turned, holding a hand out for Ed to take. Brother, we should investigate the source of the light. For all we know, it could be someone who was in the cavern with us when the ring started going crazy. Lifted from the dirt, Ed brushed the dirt from his pant and coat, looking at Al with his usual unrushed, nonchalant gaze. I doubt it'd be anyone from the cavern. If it were, wouldn't they be in here with us? I guess, but that still doesn't explain why there'd be a light way down here. Alphonse looked curiously between the crack and Ed. Still, I think it would be beneficial to investigate. Don't you? A moment of silence passed between the two before Ed sighed in defeat, raising his hands with a sheepish shrug. Fine. Besides, it's not like we could possibly get into any more trouble than what we're already in. Moving towards the crack in the cavern wall, Ed didn't think twice about climbing through to the other side, making quite a racket while doing so. Brother, hold on. Don't you think we should be a little quieter? If the light isn't coming from the someone that was with us in the lab before, how do we know that they maybe aren't an enemy? Looking over his shoulder, Ed waved dismissively, smirking. We've been through way worse than this, Al. Come on. What's the worst that could happen? As they walked along it what seemed to be a tunnel, Al couldn't help but notice that the walls of said tunnel were progressively getting bigger and more defined as through they had been dug away. Ed. Do you see what I see? Progressively moving forward with his hands behind his head, Ed carelessly gazed back towards Al. Do I see what? Al motioned with a nod of his head. Look at the cavern walls. As we keep moving this direction, they're gradually getting wider and taller. They almost look as though they've been dug away. Hey, look. Kneeling, Al's hand gently traced the floor, his fingers tracing the markings in the sand. Brother, these are tracks. Kneeling down in front of Al, Ed looked closer. Though they were extremely unfamiliar, they were tracks. From a vehicle of sorts. But nothing like a car, wagon or train. No. These tracks were far too wide and had jagged marks overlapping in the center. They were nothing like anything Ed or Al had ever seen. Looking up, Al shrugged. It would explain why there's no loose stone on the cavern floor. What do you mean? Ed said, still examining the tracks. I mean, if a vehicle came through here. It could have been used to clear away the debris accumulated after digging out the cavern walls. Averting his attention up away from the tracks, Ed paused. There's no vehicle in existence big enough to handle a job like, nothing that doesn't require a track anyway. Al paused, averting his gaze while shrugging. Nothing that we know of. Just then, both brothers' attention was drawn behind Ed as the sound of rocks being ripped from the cavern wall echoed softly through the air. It was soft. But definite. The sound lasted for several moments, then softly faded into the stone. After a few moments of listening, Al broke the silence. But only with a whisper. That sounded an awful lot like drilling, didn't it? Nodding, Ed scowled. Yes, it did. Moving along the tunnel wall quickly, the blue light grew brighter and brighter. As the light was reaching its brightest, Ed and Al paused, hiding behind a large stone protruding out from the tunnel wall. Gesturing for Al to hang back, Ed peered up and over only to freeze in awe. Al. You gotta see this. Peering out from behind Edward, Alphonse shared a similar astonishment. A massive void lay out before them with ceilings that rose at least 150 feet in height, and quite possibly 500 feet in both width and length. But that wasn't the half of it. Scattered all around the chasm floor were massive blue crystals. These crystals turned out to be the very source of light that they sought. Ed, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Without looking to acknowledge Alphonse, Ed simply nodded. Seeing. I'm still not believing. Jumping over the sheltering stone into the open, Al slowly approached the behemoth crystal, marveling at its sheer size. Look at this thing. Ed, I don't think I've ever seen a geological feature like this that's just so huge. Growling, Ed followed suit and fell to the ground with a thud. Al, shut up. Someone is down here drilling. Do you really want them to know that we're here? With his hand against the massive crystal's surface, Al huffed. Brother, you make it sound like whoever just happens to be down here is an enemy. Ed shrugged, moving past Al and the behemoth crystal to another set of crystals. Well, you were the one that pointed it out earlier that we don't know if they're friends or enemies. Laughing, Al followed. Since when do you give any situation a second thought before just jumping into the middle of it? Whipping around, Ed growled. I look before I leap, Al. Turning away, Ed's voice faded to a murmur. Most of the time. Suddenly, the sound of drilling ripped through the room far louder than what it had been before. The sheer volume of the action reverberated through the walls and ground, shaking small pebbles that lay by the brothers' feet. Moving forward quickly, the two followed the sound, hearing it get louder and louder. As the tunnel began to form into a rounded corner, the sight of large, dark and light gray boxes emanating blue light came into view. Standing behind the crates, the two moved slowly, peering out from behind, looking down. No more than 30 yards away down a sloping ramp of rock, what could only be described as metal monsters moved in pattern in and around the cavern floor. Armored and massive, some were solid purple in color. But most gleamed in the dim light, radiating purple, black and silver armor, red visors glowing against the dark. Several operated treated vehicles with enormous drills, while others operated handheld devices that created a beam of light that seemed to cut through the crystals like they were butter. The whole spectacle could only be described as being like a mechanical beehive. Armored beings that weren't mining the crystals were carrying them to mining carts. Others pushed the carts back and forth to a humongous structure made of rings that escalated up several hundred feet beyond the cavern ceiling. An elevator system situated within these rings carried carts of the blue crystal ore to what both Ed and Al guessed was the surface. Slowly looking at Ed, Al growled in a whisper. "And you said like we couldn't possibly get into any more trouble." Sharing a similar tone, Ed sneered, raising his voice from a whisper to a yell. "How the hell was I supposed to know there'd be metal giants mining down here? SHHHH. Brother. They'll hear you." Clamping his hand over Ed's mouth, Al watched. But it was too late. A small group of the giants that seemed to be standing guard had heard the brothers' voices carry down from the rise. One turned to the other and motioned to investigate. With a simple nod, the other raised what could only be a weapon of sorts, started to climb the slope up to where the two boys were hiding. With an almost hysteria in his voice, Al looked down at Ed, whose mouth was still clamped shut. "See what you've done? Now what do we do? It's coming." Prying Al's hand from his mouth, Ed growled. "Hold on." Placing his hands together, Ed slammed his hands against the wall that lay behind them. A brilliant flash of blue light blasted out against the darkness behind the stone that lay at the top of the rise. The giant climbing the ram saw this, and froze for only moments before cocking his weapon, arming it. Trying to have the element of surprise, the being veered around the rock, pointing his weapon at the possible intruder, only to find the space empty. The large mechanical being investigated the surrounding space and tunnel, only to find the immediate vicinity deserted. With a shrug, the being turned, calling to the others, speaking clear English. "There's nothing up here. You guys are obviously seeing things." And with that he returned back down the slope, carrying his weapon nonchalantly on his shoulder. Meanwhile, in a small, cramped space in the rock, Ed stared out of a small hole, watching as the massive metal creature retreated. "See, Al? You had absolutely nothing to worry about." Grumbling, Al struggled to move in the tight space. "Brother, what would you have done is you wouldn't have been able to use your alchemy." Shrugging, Ed turned his head as much as he could, given his limited range of motion in the space provided. "Why are you complaining? We didn't get caught. Just be thankful for that." Grumbling, Al huffed. "And I suppose you should be thankful I'm not claustrophobic." With an almost laugh, Ed shook his head. "Sheesh, Al, you're starting to sound an awful lot like Winry." "I am not." Al whined, looking away. "Can we please just get out of here?" Just then, the wall seemed as though it imploded in on itself, and a set of metal hands reached in, snagging both Elric brothers. Pulled through the dust and rubble, Ed and Al's eyes were suddenly level with a glowing red, V-shaped visor. "I knew I heard voices." "Hey, what are you doing up there? Starscream will have our heads for sure if we don't meet our quota for the day." Turning on his heel, with the brothers struggling in his hands to break free, the mechanoid being trotted briskly down the slope into the main cavern, meeting a small group of alike individuals. "I found these two humans trespassing in the upper-level cavern." One pointed to Al with its long, metal, almost talon-like fingers, speaking in a raspy, low voice. "Are you sure this one is even human? Looks like some kind of weird mini-con to me." Another growled, smacking the previous to speak. "Don't be an idiot. It's just a human wearing some kind of armor. What's going on over here?" In that moment, the entire group turned to meet the unsettling gaze of another mechanical being, one that looked very much different from the others. He was a tall and slender being, far skinnier and more petite than the alike individuals wandering around the cavern. His red eyes glowed profusely as they analyzed the scene that lay out before them. In part, the best way the boys could describe this new being was that he was pointy. Mainly dark and light grays with subtle hints of red decorated his armor. He strutted casually, minimally moving large wing-like structures on his back. As he approached, he growled, getting in the face of the nearest miner. "Answer my question, soldier. What is going on over here? You Vehicons are supposed to be working, not dawdling." "Vehicons?" the two brothers whispered simultaneously, while looking to one another. Pointing to the humans, the so-called Vehicon that this other mechanoid addressed, answered. "These two humans were caught trespassing within the upper-level mining tunnels, Commander Starscream." The Vehicon speaking then pointed to the other holding the humans in his hands. Looking at the two, this Starscream character slowly approached, grinning rather ominously for the occasion. Yet another Vehicon spoke. "Commander, do you suppose they were sent by the Autobots?" Whipping around suddenly, striking the unsuspecting Vehicon in the face with his long razor-sharp fingers, the action causing sparks to fly, Starscream sent the questioning Vehicon to the floor. "Don't be daft. The Autobots only have so many human allies." He then paused suddenly, then slowly turned to the two. "Then again, if they are in fact allied with the Autobots. We could potentially get useful information from them. Our Lord and Master would be most pleased to learn the location of our enemy's base." Pointing at the Vehicon holding the brothers, Starscream shouted suddenly. "You there! Take those two to the brig. Lord Megatron will be most pleased if an interrogation of these two weak insects reveals valuable information." Just then, from the Vehicon's hand, Ed shouted as loud as his lungs could possibly get. "Who are you calling a tiny bug that escapes the wrath of a shoe because he's so small that he fits in the groves and can't be squashed, you narcissistic, bug-eyed hunk of metal?" Taken back, Starscream seemed a bit dumbfounded that so much rant came out of one human. Scream growled, clenching his fist slowly, trying to emphasize the sharpness of his fingers for the golden-haired human to see. "What did you call me, you little cretin?" Looking at Ed, Alphonse growled. "Brother, he didn't call you that. I don't disagree with the later part of your statement, but, still. You think it wise to be picking a fight in a metal, Titan-like being?" Growling louder, Starscream activated arm-mounted missiles, aiming them at the boys and, by unfortunate circumstance, the Vehicon holding them. "I have had enough of your insolence, humans. From this moment, until I state otherwise. You shall remain silent." There was in fact a moment of silence by all beings present in the cavern, until a certain golden-haired and golden-eyed human yawned as loudly as he could before returning his own sinister grin. "Yeah, about that. I really don't do silent." Managing to have wiggled his hands free, Edward slammed his hands together hard, then forcing them down into the metal giant's hand. There was a brilliant flash of blue simultaneously with the Vehicon crying out in sheer agony. Both Edward and Alphonse dropped to the cavern floor. Quickly getting up, Ed turned to sneer at his handwork only to see that the Vehicon's hand was still completely intact. But that didn't change the fact that he was writhing in pain. At that very moment, most of the Vehicons and even Starscream took steps back away from the humans. Not really understanding what just happened. Looking at Al, Ed grinned. "Have you had enough of this BS too, Al?" The brother of armor simply nodded before he kneeled to ground, drawing something in the loose gravel and dirt. Ed removed his right glove, revealing to all that bore witness that his right hand was in fact metal. Clapping his hands together and moving his left hand over his right, the metal hand that was once there suddenly changed into a blade. None of the Vehicons or even Starscream thought to do anything while this entire spectacle took place in front of them. In spite of everything, they all were in awe. All of this took place in mere seconds. Shaking his head suddenly, Starscream pointed and ordered all available Vehicons to attack. Putting his hands on the structure he drew in the dirt, Alphonse, out of what seemed like thin air, raised a wall of stone between them and their attackers. It was just as sudden as the wall was raised that it seemed to be bombarded by heavy artillery. Peering around the wall only briefly, Al could see bright flashes of light that seemed to be coming from guns that were once the hands of these Vehicons. Al's eyes followed the ammunition trail from when it left the barrel to when it hit the wall. The ammunition they were using seemed to be made of energy. Looking at Ed, who sat beside him behind the wall, Al growled, smacking him hard. Ed howled in pain before glaring at Al. "What did you do that for?" Al simply growled in return. "So much for looking where you leap, brother." As the cannon fire continued to rain down against the wall, Starscream couldn't help but marvel. How could two seemingly human boys create this in sheer seconds? How could they make a Vehicon trooper fall in such writhing pain? As suddenly as the energy fired from the barrel of the guns lay waste to the stone way, the notion hit Starscream, Could these two have a sort of technology that the Decepticons did not know about? As suddenly as he had ordered the attack, Starscream raised his hand ordering a ceasefire. As they stopped, the Viacons looked dazed. Why would Starscream be ordering a ceasefire? Looking at them, Screamer growled. I want those two alive. Motioning to the wall, Screamy smiled. Any human that has the technology to do this in sheer seconds, could prove to be quite useful to the Decepticon cause. Well, that's the ending of that chapter. I do hope you enjoy this video. If you like to see more, remember to hit that like button, subscribe to this channel and leave a comment down below. Until next time.